This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Always a joy to have Jake Burns on to talk Cleveland Browns. Jake Burns from Browns Film Breakdown. Jake, how you been, man?
I've been good, man. I've been good. Happy to be with you. You know that we talked on my pod, recently here too, and it means we're getting close. We're doing some of these roster discussions. It's exciting. We launched a new website, like you mentioned there, brownsfilmbreakdown.com. We're excited about that. So yeah, man, been busy with all that comes with launching a brand. You know how that is.
It's definitely something, and it's fun. It's rewarding in its own way.
Right.
The offseason is an interesting point too, because I was talking about this because one of my viewers asked me, like, what's my least favorite and most favorite? And I think it's the same thing to me. It's like there's not a lot of news dropping, so there's not a ton of interest during like the summer months in the offseason. But what I do like about the offseason that there is time. Like me and you both did some rewatches. I'm still finishing my rewatch of the 2023 season, and you get to kind of challenge some takes that maybe you built up because you're spending so much time reacting to the games, reacting to other people's takes, that you don't really get to reflect a lot on the season. I think that's the one thing I love about the off season is like I get to go back and say and evaluate certain games. Cause like I remember I was high on DTR. Then I rewatched the games. I'm like, okay, certain moves start to make some sense now.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I kind of see what Kevin might have saw that might have decreased there. But the Browns made some changes, not the biggest changes in the world to this roster. It really ran it back in some ways. But how is this team different than what they were in 2023 when you look at the makeup of this roster?
It's a good question. I think collectively on offense, you look at where they perceptually upgraded, right? So I think a huge sticking point for folks this past year was, thinking that Joe Flacco outperformed Deshaun Watson. Having gone through those, revisited those, I don't think that's the case. I think the Browns figured out schematically how to handle themselves in a better way the back end of the year, which benefited Joe, which I think would have benefited Deshaun in a pretty serious way. So like, the quarterback thing, if Deshaun's playing all 17, should be better. There's no doubt in my mind it'll be better. He'll take care of the football. The running back room has improved as far as the depth behind Jerome Ford until Nick is back. Deontay Foreman's been a nice player for a while, underrated kind of a guy around the league who you talk to people and they're like, that guy can play, but he doesn't maybe necessarily have a mainstream name. Naheem Hines is kind of another name to mix, to sort of fold into that mix and feel a little bit good about the versatility that he can bring, but he's a special teams ace is what you're hoping to get out of him more than anything. And then just Jerome Ford, like the Band-Aid got ripped off last year, right? So that's a matter of that. And then the wide receiver room, you're adding a pretty serious talent, right? A wide receiver the Browns have articulated they're higher on than the rest of the league, and they think they can fix the Broncos' usage of Jerry Jeudy. But just going from Amari Cooper and Njoku and Elijah Moore to then folding in Jerry Jeudy to those three guys is an improvement to the collective group. So the offensive line is just about being healthy. I'm sure you would agree with me there. They can get some better health luck this year. You feel pretty good about the offense being better because the guys that need to be out there, Deshaun and the offensive line, are healthier, and from that stems a better offense. Can't get much worse than last year, Quincy. They were like 31st in EPA for the year. So you consider how they were able to win games despite that. You feel good about it. On the defensive side too, like everyone's back, essentially, that matters. JOK is another year advanced, and then you put in with Jordan Hicks, who's a great veteran up front. They got deeper defensive tackle, and we think Mike Hall can be a nice contributor early. The secondary we know is good, and if you get the safety room to be healthier this year than the way it ended last year, it's just a good team, man. Like they didn't overhaul much, but they just they fixed up the steak, put a little garlic butter on the steak, man. They enhanced the experience is how I view it. And if they get that injury luck to go in a better direction this year, it could be this weird phenomenon, Quincy, where like they win the same number of games as last year, but they're just clearly a better football team and ready to compete in a serious way in the playoffs.
Absolutely. Let's kind of go back to some of the smaller changes that they made here. Naheem Hines is an interesting one that I've heard be brought up. When I look at him, you kind of see like a kind of traditional third down scat back type.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at Jerome Ford, and I think his ideal role is not as a primary running back. Like I think there's some flaws in his game that kind of show himself. But I thought he was fine enough in receiving, and he does have that burst of speed that does make him a nice change of pace back. Do you see those two players as conflicting with each other as far as like what roles they can take in that running back room? And like, do you think they're going to be naturally competitors with each other? Because I don't think Deontay Foreman is, I think, clearly the Kareem Hunt replacement. Like
Yeah, I agree.
that's kind of what they went there for him. So it makes you wonder, okay, who's that third guy? What's that third role going to be? And is that something where these two guys who they're not similar players, but they could fill similar voids?
I think the way I would phrase that is they can both do it. And why I say that is like Jerome, I think it'll be game plan dependent. If they want to get into some empty looks and they have an idea this week, we want to get the back involved in moving outside of the pocket. We want to get them involved in whatever scheme stuff, whether that's running routes or whether that's a part of like some quick option game that they want to put in this year that I think they will here and there, sprinkle in a little bit of it. Like, in my opinion, it'll depend on what they want. If they want a traditional back end who can help a little more with protection, he's got a little more, just sheer like mass to him, they'll probably go forward a little bit more because Ford can catch the football and get out of the backfield and do some things, but he can be a guy. Hey man, we need you to stay in during these protection looks and really get after either cutting an edge or handling the linebacker. But if they want the back out in empty sets or they want the back involved in like, hey, this linebacker is a mismatch, man. If we get them in this nickel personnel and they're going to play 58, we got to get you in space on him. Then it could tweak week to week. So I would imagine the way that I view it is until Nick is back, Jerome is kind of the front of the line because he can do a little bit of everything. Deontay is an expanded form of what Kareem was doing because it got last year, and I know you would agree with me on this because the Browns kind of put it into practical use, but like Kareem just wasn't in early down look. He wasn't in any real like, hey, Kareem, take this series. That just didn't happen very often unless the Browns were chasing the scoreboard because he could be a pass blocker for you. But like he just wasn't he wasn't really a part in that. He was a great short yardage player, and he's got a real knack for that, to fall forward and like
Do you think that they use Kareem Hunt more similar? Because like when I say Deontay Foreman's taking that Kareem Hunt role, I think they're going to be a little bit more ambitious than what they did last year. Like I'm thinking like 2022 Hunt, where like there would be drives where it's like, oh, Deontay's just out there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly how I'm saying. Like I think he's going to do the Kareem snaps, but I think there's also like, hey man, we're running it well today, and we want to give you a couple sets here to really get downhill on duo or whatever. Like he's going to see a more expanded early down role. And so again, like kind of back to the basis of your question. Until Nick is back, I do envision a role for all three. Although Hines, I think you have to really check. Is he still kind of on the pup and working back from the knee? I think the expectations are kind of low for me in terms of what his output ultimately looks like. But he'll be around. He'll be a bigger player than Pierre Strong was last year. But I think we kind of envision like, oh, could he be like a 500-yard receiver? Like that's not going to happen. He's going to give you some of that here and there, but I think you would agree with me with how big this kid. And again, I don't think people understand how big, like jarring, the difference in kickoff is going to look this year. Like that's a real position. So having him play that position, be really good at that, and then give us some versatility options in the offense is kind of how I envision it. So to your point of when Nick is back, I do think it's going to probably be Jerome more often, but I kind of hone in on, hey, we have a team this week on the schedule who has given up the most receiving yards to backs out of the backfield. That's where my eyes would be like, all right, man, like I could see them getting Naheem involved in these specific situations. If we go empty, they usually play check three, three strong to this look. Like we know we're going to get him against a hook defender because if we were to say get in 10 personnel and bring four wide receivers on the field, they're going to stay in dime, and that changes. We don't want that. We want to isolate this player in this scenario when we know we get this personnel package. And like that's where a devastating situation for a team could be Naheem getting out there and kind of being that player to get a mismatch. But the pecking order kind of is kind of built around like Deontay's there to kind of, when Nick is back, release the burden from him feeling like he has to handle everything early down. And then you're giving Ford the benefit of the doubt that he can be a bit more of the late down player. And if he can't, he proves he's invaluable. He can't catch the ball. They can't get him in space. Then I think Hines is there as like, we need that from you. But in an ideal world, those three can handle it. And Hines is like the ace up their sleeve on offense when they need him, but more so a real weapon in the kick return stuff that has a chance to impact stuff pretty immensely.
You mentioned kick return, and I think this kick return thing is going to be fascinating to watch in the preseason because, like, you know, when you watch like a sitcom and like they have a pilot and like three different people who are in the main cast of that pilot like just aren't on the next episode or something like that. Like it happened with like Star Trek where it's a completely different captain on the first episode than Captain Kirk. And I think that's going to be the same thing with this kickoff thing, because even the experience that we're trying to pull from, which is essentially 4 weeks of football in the XFL. And it's not exactly the same rule. It's just a little bit more similar. I have no idea how people are going to figure this out. It's going to take like 8 weeks. Like, but we're not going to know what this is actually going to look like and how teams are actually adjust to it and what the trends are until like late in the season. And even then, there are going to be some trends that pop up that we think are going to work and be the new wave. And then that's just not a thing. It's just like it's just, okay, it just was hot for like that 1 second. And then somebody figured out a pretty easy way to fix it. I just think that this thing is going to be, we haven't seen something this new being beta tested in the NFL in a very long time. And I'm just interested to see like, how does that change how you structure your actives for preseason? How does that change how you do the preseason, right? Because usually you feel pretty comfortable. Like, okay, I know who the guys are who are going to play in my coverage. I don't need to have them out there in the preseason. But now it's like, you probably do, right? Like everybody who's going to play in the so does that mean they also play in their snaps? Like, I'm just fascinated to see what this change does. That like we know it's obviously meant to change the kickoff stuff, but this is going to have ripple effects that I think are much larger than people assume. And I'm just fascinated to find out what those ripple effects are, because it's impossible to predict that.
It is, and that's why I'm looking forward to Thursday, because that's the first game. We get Hall of Fame game. We actually get to see it in practice. Now you can go if you're a real sicko, you can go rewatch some of those XFL games and stuff like that where they get into this stuff. But like having it with NFL athletes on the field, I think is just going to be pretty interesting to see. And I schematically, I'm sure there are going to be some ways they want to try to approach it early. We want to do these things, but as we notice how teams are either kicking the ball off or trying to take advantage of the rule, it's going to be an evolving thing through the year. What I hope is that they found a way here to make it a meaningful part of the game again. And above all else, right? There's going to be some quirks and weird things. We don't want to see massive outliers where a team wins by returning 3 kicks in the game. I mean, that would be kind of interesting and cool, but like, I think the NFL would tell you, like, we don't want to see that kind of swing here, but we do want to see it be a meaningful part of things again, where teams are valuing those roster positions and it's giving guys that have been cut out of the league a chance to be out there. Like to your point, are we going to see teams moving offensive linemen into this fold, like your athletic O linemen, and moving them, pulling them, blocking down, trying to wash people down and kick out? Like, it's just, it's an extremely cool thing, but it's a giant mystery because you have these ways teams were doing in the XFL and whatever, but like the NFL is, hey man, we hired 4 research and dev cats to just map this out for it. Like, they're going to do everything they can to make this the most efficient version of what's out there, and with the best athletes in the world, it's got a chance to be some wild stuff. So, I mean, as far as early season NFL tracking, this is top of the line of what you want to watch.
Yeah, and there's just so many more minds at it too, right? Because in the XFL, there's 8 teams. There's 32 in the NFL. So that alone, like, just quadruples the amount of people who are trying to take a stab at it. Also, the quality of mind, you would hope, is better, even though sometimes there are guys in the NFL who just like kind of stick around. But there's way more special team staffs on NFL teams too. So it's just, and just the special teamers themselves, they're going to have opinions on like how this works and like this if this makes sense. And it's going to be one of them things where I'm like, man, I don't think anybody, like, there's not really a great template there, even in the XFL. Like, I know that the reverse thing is like the one thing that people remember from the XFL one, but that wasn't like a super successful strategy like in the XFL from what I remember in 2021. There's really nothing. There was not even enough time in the XFL for trends to emerge, and that was 4 weeks of football. So I'm just interested how that's going to be changing, how that's going to look. But
Right. No, right. I mean, I don't think enough people were even watching it really to be heavily invested in what it ultimately would become. Because I know when they announced it, I try to do my best to watch football when I can, but like if it's the off season and I'm telling my wife who like loses me for 4 or 5 months here during the season, like really loses me, they're like, "Hey babe, got to watch this Alabama game's on, got to watch these guys Birmingham play somebody or whatever." Like she's just gonna, the quickest way to get a divorce in my life. So I got to pick and choose my spaces here to go into to watching football. But I did catch some of it, and you can see that there's like some things they've tried to do with it. But when you get the best minds in the sport and people devoted to this nonstop, like what that's going to look like and how teams that are really good at it actually gain advantages from it is because it got to the point last year where it's like if you take it out of the end zone, you're just being silly. Like you're just
yeah,
giving up yardage for no reason.
they need a way, and I think this is how you find out kickoffs matter. You need a way for a 10-yard return to be a big play, and you need a way for a 5-yard loss on a return to also be a big play or something that feels like it can happen on any play. Like it needs to feel like, hey, he could break this off, get 20, we can get better field position, or we can stop him and get him back 5 extra yards. Like there needs to be that gamble of field position instead of it being like, hey, 25 yards. Like, because even when you returned it out the end zone, you can get 25 yards the way the rules are set up. Right. So I think that is what the goal is. I don't think the goal is like to get a bunch of kickoff return touchdowns. That would be something that they would immediately come up with like rules to be, all right, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Like,
and they dropped all those rules. I want to make sure I saw it because today kind of like it was put out there, kicks onsides are illegal before the fourth quarter. Teams, you can only kick an onside if you're losing, and you have to inform the other team that you're kicking them. So like there isn't going to be any of that surprise stuff or ways to cheat the sit. Like they're basically saying we want that out of the game unless you tell us you're doing it, and you can only do it when situational dictation says that you have to do it. So people might not like that. I know that there's some fans of like the surprise onside and stuff like that, but if you're a harbinger for the nostalgia of it, the kickoff's still the same in college ball, so you can get your fill on Saturday, but it's going to get different on Sundays.
2 things from somebody who's watched a lot of spring football. One, NFL is going to have to figure out a new way to record those kickoffs because watching it from the usual angle, it looks horrible when you just pan by all those guys sitting still. They need to put that camera in the end zone, something. They need to change how they film that. And it's going to be interesting to see how fast they figure that out because the NFL is usually on top of them, that kind of stuff. And 2, that tells me right there, they are like this close from getting to that 4th and 12 thing that spring football has been trying to dole out for the longest, right? Because that's basically the rule, except for you just don't have that 4th and 12 option where, if you're down and trailing, you can do that. It'd be interesting. The one thing about the XFL, they do have UFL now, they do have a high percentage of like close games. Now, I don't know how that plays out with 32 teams of NFL talent. Things start to change there, but we'll see. Now let's move on to some of the defensive changes. There's not really, well, actually, I want to talk about the offensive line because there's a new offensive line coach. Now, I think a lot of people are concerned. Brian Callahan, really highly regarded, left. Bill Callahan, my bad, really highly regarded, left coach with his son. And people are wondering where that's going to put the Browns offensive line. Now, I think Andy Dickerson, I believe his reputation around the league is pretty good. Not Callahan good, but still really solid there. With him, what you've seen with him in Seattle, how do you think his plan for the run game and protections is going to change versus what it was with Callahan? And also you got to factor in Ken Dorsey with that. Yeah. And does that change the fit or how much you like a fit for some of the specific names on this offensive line?
It's a good question. I don't have a fantastic feel for the drastic changes they're going to do. Obviously, as you know, the Browns, how I'm interested to see it is it's obvious to me that they did a good job of developing some guys, right? Taking a JC Treader, taking a Wyatt Teller, and lifting them into different places, different heights, right? So that is like, there's 2 things here. There's game day coaching and how your guys are executing, and then there's developing talent. I think we could all agree coaches are doing multiple things there. I think what Callahan was doing best was developing talent. taking guys from a level they came in at, the knowledge, and using, again, Scott Peters was involved with that too, the strike system thing that he does, in guys finding some ways to think about the game and think about how to attack the opposing rusher. And those development tools, I think, help some guys. Where I am interested in is where we would agree is that I don't think the Browns' best players were getting better. Like, I don't think that they were like, my point is, like, the development in the actual application of success on the field started to become kind of mixed by the end.
Hmm.
I just kind of view it as, like, an example is the Browns all year last year, teams did line games to them, tackle in twists, and then the introvert of that going different, where the tackles twisting inside and out, and then sometimes the edge would crash inside and the tackles looping. They were so bad at handling line games last year that I started to be like a running bit for me. If I were to cut up film of, like, they didn't handle this and as a free guy at the quarterback, it would be embarrassing. Like, it would be laughable. So I obviously respect Bill Callahan immensely, but I watch it and I think that the Browns have clearly done a nice job of raising the basement with Peters and Callahan, bringing guys along. But the thing I'm not opposed to is a different voice in the approach to these guys currently in house. And to be honest, if you want to spin this glass half full, because you really can't sit here and say, like, losing Bill Callahan's a great thing. Like, it's probably not. But I'm not also in the room every day to know what is connecting with these guys watching tape or what's connecting with them learning on the field. But if you were to say they weren't elevating some guys from the lower tiers to kind of putting them into the forefront of being like really regular nice starters, that's true. But you got to look at it from the fold of, like, Jedrick Wells didn't develop. Like, there's no development. They have not found the way to reach him as a person, to either put him in the right place to play or give him the tools he needs or attack the way to get his mental in the right place. And, like, some of the stuff in terms of on-field reactionary things, they just weren't very good at the past few years. I have thought for a couple of years the Browns' offensive line has been a little overrated compared to performance. Run game versus pass game. Run game's been relatively good with the schemes I think they've been allowed to use. They do the best they can. But, like, from the performance of the guys in-house getting paid the most, I just think there's something more there. I'm not saying Dickerson has the answers. I'm not saying it goes well. But what I am saying
Hmm.
is I'm very intrigued to see how a different voice, how that works for them, because a different way to think about the game than they've been given, a different attack plan where maybe the players in the group, instead of, like, Bill's going to say what Bill wants to do and you're going to do it, having them maybe have a voice, like Joel, Jack, Joel or Dewan, you guys are working right side combos. How are you most comfortable? Are you most comfortable locking and moving with your guy? Or are you comfortable, like, knowing he's going outside and trading him off and passing players back and forth? Like, I just think that there's, relative to what the reputation is, I do think the Browns can get better on the offensive line. And, like, I'm interested in what that ultimately looks like, because it could be really bad. And you and I are talking week 8 and it's like, I miss Bill Callahan. Something's off here. But we could also be talking about, like, hey, these guys are playing pretty well. And Dickerson has a real play in that. And we can notice the different approaches they're taking, right?
Yeah, and when you mention that with Callahan, it does remind me, because sometimes you'll see offensive coordinators like this, or even defensive coordinators. Like, I think Greg Williams is a good example of one who can get somebody to a baseline, but as far as, like, helping them progress a little bit further, sometimes there's some issues with that. Greg Roman, to me, like with Lamar Jackson, I thought got him to a very solid baseline, but I thought at some point it was somebody who needed to kind of go because of that. And I'm not saying that's the same situation with Brian Callahan, Bill Callahan, but it is interesting, right? Because you do look at Wyatt has that breakout 2020 year, and then every year after that, there's been, I think, a considerable, like, drop off in consistency for him since 2020. And then you look at Jed, another one where there's a considerable drop off in consistency. I struggle to understand why it is that Jed has struggled to figure out some kind of solution for getting beat inside, when that's been a known problem for a while. And I can't just say that's all on Jed. Like, at some point, you have to ask yourself, like, what's going on there? Like, there feels like I don't expect Jet to become a master at not getting beat inside over an offseason, but I do expect him to have some like parachutes, like if he feels like he's getting beat inside, get beat inside slower. Figure out a way to get beat inside just a little slower, but it's the same speed he gets beat inside. Or even with Wyatt, like one thing with Wyatt, he either demolishes you or he gets beat bad. Like that game against Pittsburgh, where Larry Ogunjobi was put into the work shed. Like that's the kind of something like I wish that could be a little bit better for them, because sometimes I think that pops up. Joe Batonio is getting older. He's not bad, but he is a 10-year vet. He's had some back issues. I think it shows up a little bit. Like he's not as powerful as he used to be. His anchor's not as strong. It's just stuff that's going to go with age there. And then DeJuan Jones, immense talent, ton of potential. What do you see that right tackle situation playing out as? Because I know a lot of people have gotten creative with flipping DeJuan to left, or moving Jed to left, or moving Jack Conklin to right, and keeping Jack Conklin at right. Moving. It doesn't seem like the Browns are interested in getting that creative. They already gave Jed the 5th-year option, so he's going to play left tackle. What do you think the plan is between DeJuan and Jack?
I have a hard time envisioning they don't play DeJuan Jones, because he's giving him a year. Like it's possible, as we saw, as weird as last year was, where Jack Conklin takes a whipped player into the knee, right? Takes a body right into his knee. Like he could play every game this year if you're going to start him. So to me, it's hard to envision DeJuan Jones looking as promising as he did last year and saying, hey, we're just going to let him take the year off. Like, he's probably, this the NFL, he's going to probably play. But my point is, you don't go into the season thinking somebody's going to get hurt. So, like, there's a chance he never plays. And that would be so bad for the maximization of, like, the advantage he's giving you as being a very competent first-year tackle last year going into year 2. And, like, that's cheap. That's what you want to keep developing. So, yeah, if this were a Madden depth chart, Jack Conklin's got a higher overall than him, I'd start him. But like that's not how the world works in the league. Yeah. So like you need to play him. So I personally would have Jack Conklin as like my swing tackle and ready to help out. And because Jack's also getting paid. Like he's not going to be mad. He's getting his money still. So like I think you got to look out for your bottom line. Find where DeJuan is going to solve one of your 2 tackle spots. And then, like, if Jed can't cut it or they don't get through to him or he doesn't feel the pressure of the 5th-year option like you need to and perform well, then you have Jack kind of there ready to go. Jack's played left tackle in his career. He's played left tackle at Michigan State coming out. Like, these guys both have experience floating between tackle sides. And to me personally, Quincy, and I know some people see this differently, but, like, with the perception change of a different coach, I would be trying these guys to see, like, hey, Jed, would you be more comfortable on the right side? Like, would it help you? Would you feel better? Would you play harder? Does it talk to us? If it does, then give him a chance to play the right side where he's been his whole life until he was with Cleveland, and put DeJuan and Jack and figure it out at left tackle. Because if DeJuan can be your left tackle for the future, like that guy's athletic enough to get it done, and he's so big. Like I know he played at Ohio State as a right tackle predominantly, but he started his career on the left side. So like he could do it. He's athletic enough to do it too. And the home run upside of having him be like your guy for a rookie deal here is so encouraging. To answer your question, like I just think DeJuan and Jed should be the guys to go at the beginning, and Jack is your swing tackle player. And then like to me, if like one of those 2 aren't getting it done, you have Jack ready to go. But I also wouldn't be tied to like, hey, this guy's been a left tackle for us and this guy's been a right tackle. Like flirt with it and see if you can find a spot that will help. You have to come out of this year with 2 guys that can play. If that's giving Jack Conklin 1 more year on a deal, or like, Jed is a great year and has, a phenomenal season, and he gets another deal or whatever. Like I need them to come out of this year with 2 guys they feel good about for the next season. That's what's most important. So hopefully they solve that somehow.
I think with DeJuan, I do see how the Browns like to develop players, right? Like with JOK, they let him play Sam. Will for a little while. No, Sam. And then they move them around a little bit. He's still playing the same position, but they gave him more responsibility. I wonder with DeJuan if it's a similar thing where they're like, hey, we just want him to play tackle, right tackle first, like just learn that. And I think Tristan Wirfs, same thing that they did out there in Tampa Bay, where they
Yeah.
had him play tackle for a couple of years. And then once we get to year 3, we can start like having that conversation about moving him. But it's when I talked to my guy Vach, who is a offensive line guru kind of guy online for the Cowboys, he talks about it. He's like, one thing people will kind of overestimate is that it's not always going to be about athletic ability if you can switch over, because it's a lot of handwork, right? It's a lot
Yeah.
of like left, right, left, 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 and you're flipping that. And some people's brains just can't handle that for whatever reason. So it's like, unless you're really working with that player, you don't know. And I wonder where, like, if I could just talk to them, and maybe somebody can do this, because like you're going to get availability for the position coaches here in camp.
Yeah.
Acts like, hey, do you think like that's an element of it that Dewan can handle? Because we all know he's athletic. We all know he's big as a wall. Like everything that we can see would make us think that he can flip. But, you know, you also want to see where he's comfortable at, and also want him to just get a good baseline. You want him to be a good NFL player and don't mess up that development by trying to move him too soon. But yeah, I think the offensive line is a sneaky area of intrigue for this team, because I think a lot of people look at that offensive line, they think of 2020, but it ain't 2020 anymore. Like, you know, Joel's not 2020 Joel, Jed's not 2020 Jed, and maybe he could be better than that, because I don't think that's the best version of him he can be. Yeah. Wyatt, I think that is peak Wyatt Teller's 2020 Wyatt. Like, can he get closer to that? Is he going to be asked to do the same stuff? Are they going to be moving the guards as much as they did in the last system? Ethan Posick is another one, because he's one of those guys who floated around in the league for a little while and then like got to Cleveland and all of a sudden became like a really, really good center. So you wonder like how much of that was scheme fit? Is that going to change in a different system, or are they just going to keep what was there that worked for him there, which is feasible? It's still the same head coach. So there's a lot of areas of intrigue there. We talked about the right tackle thing. Let's move over to the defense, where there is less intrigue. But one of the things I was thinking about with the defensive line is Miles had that shoulder issue at the end of last year, which I think really affected his effectiveness at the end of the year. Za'Darius Smith, while like the pressure numbers and I think the pass rush win rate was really good for him last year, he had a real hard time, harder than he normally does, finishing, right? I think the missed tackle percentage was above 20, like 27 or something like that, something insane for him. And then Dalvin Tomlinson, who I thought across the board just was a little bit under what he normally does from missed tackle percentage, from a run stop, from a run defense perspective as well. I thought he wasn't as good as he's been in Minnesota and New York. And that is an interesting takeaway for me to have for one of the best defensive lines in football. And it makes me wonder, hey, if Dalvin has a good year, which I anticipate he can have a good year, he's not like cooked or physically incapable. Like, he's coming off a knee scope, but we'll see.
Right.
Za'Darius, nothing about Za'Darius in his tape last year screamed physical decline to me. It just was, he wasn't finishing for whatever reason. And he's had a year like that in his career, I think 2016 in Baltimore, where he just couldn't get a tackle to save his life. And then obviously Miles is Miles. I look at this defensive line and think, man, they can be way better if just those three players, if Miles doesn't have a shoulder injury, if Za'Darius and Dalvin play better, and then you add in like a Michael Hall, maybe a Quinn Jefferson to that conversation, and you go, that's a really sneaky upgrade that they could have on a defensive line. It's not bringing in a ton of different players for a defensive line that was really damn good last year.
Yeah, there's easily a positive spin to put on that, right? Like, we know that they controlled things and they were really hard to deal with, but I think that something that people have to kind of remember is that when a team like the Browns plays that predictable man, and then they didn't care, and I bit them in the playoffs some, but like they didn't care. They didn't mind that you knew that they were playing man coverage, and when you do that, like, quarterbacks have less confusion, is the way to say it. Is like they don't hold on to the rock as long because the picture's clear. They just don't have an answer. So they're either throwing it and trying to fit it into a tight window, pass breakups happen, things like that. Like the way quarterbacks hold on to the ball longer more often is that they are confused about the pre-snap to post-snap. Oh, what's happening here? Where's that safety? I need to try
Hmm.
to find him. And that's where like that can be a bigger part of things. But I think that the thing to remember is that they get the pressure there so quick that it dictates the ball being out. And when the ball is out fast, it's less time to cover in man coverage. So that makes it easier to do. So they all work very in sync. And while the stat sheet might not show guys producing enough, maybe raw numbers, I do think it's important to remember how the structure creates chaos for the quarterback and it speeds that internal clock and makes quarterbacks make bad throws, inaccurate throws, or throws into windows that are way tighter than they want to try to throw. So I'm with you. This group is really good. And like, there's no doubt about like the depth at edge is fun, and Alex Wright behind the big three could be a big part of this. He could develop and provide them with some solutions to things and would be really fun to see. But up front, between Dalvin and adding Quentin Jefferson and like their ability to mix in Mike Hall into that, who I think can be a really ferocious speed winner in the middle of the defense, which is different than some of these pocket pushers. He's a pocket maneuver guy, which
Mike
is
Hall
so
is going to be
unique.
somebody who, when you go to camp, like people who go to camp, they're going to be like, oh, because he pops like when you
Yeah.
see him, because he quit.
Yeah.
I remember going to the Senior Bowl and like it was like the first rep of the day he took, and I was like, who is that?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
No,
has that.
he is that.
Yeah.
Like splash plays for defensive tackles are
Yeah.
where you can put a guy inside a phone booth, you can make him kind of miss. He's trying to get mitts on you, and you can swim move him or you can rip under him and you make him miss. Those are why we love the Senior Bowl one-on-ones and all that. And we go to practice and we like watching DB wide receiver one-on-ones, but then we get to watch some of the other types, those O-line, D-line. It's making that like my point is Hurst has a little bit of that. He's not consistent enough, and we obviously know that he's dealt with injuries that have just changed his body. He's now coming back from a torn pec, which is really hard to do for a guy playing that position where you're kind of leaning on people all the time. But like Hall has the quick twitch that nobody else in that group has. So, hey, if I'm going to give him 350 snaps, and of those 350, 90% of them, 80% of them, maybe to be a bit more careful, are snaps where it's predictable pass, he could have a fantastic pressure to sack season. So, yeah, like I mean, do I sit here and say the Browns got the most out of that D line last year? No, probably not. Like you probably can talk yourself into that, but like the way they play though is so different, and we'll see if Schwartz kind
Mhm.
of gets away from that in a little bit this year, and maybe not as high volume, as brazen about it. But I am definitely kind of taking into account that the way that they approach pass rush tied to coverage, it works out very sympathetically, but it doesn't always provide them. Like, look at the Browns. They were the 3-and-out kings last year. They got teams off the field, but that didn't always come from sacks. It just was making it awful for teams to get 10 yards. And that's like their motto was, we're not going to play very many snaps. They had the fewest number of snaps on defense last year because they didn't give up first downs. And that's their kind of goal here. And when you take away, think about it, Quincy, when you take 75 plays, maybe the team that's ranked toward the top 10, the defenses has played 75 more snaps. That's 75 more pass rush opportunities. That's stats. That's collection. And they're not
Mhm.
looking at it that way. They're a team driven approach here, and it's fun to watch when it all clicks. And I do think they made some improvements to get even deeper over there this year.
Yeah. When we moved to linebacker, I think the one name that you could say on this defense that they lost and that did play a little bit of a role last year was Sione Takitaki, who's out there in New England now, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think they replace what Taki brought to this team? Because he made some plays last year. Do you think it's all Jordan Hicks to kind of replace what it was that Awalk and Taki were able to bring to this defense? Or do you think like somebody like a Diabite or Tony Fields or even like a outsider like a Devin Bush kind of pops up and fills that role as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in my opinion, it was talk, and it was Anthony Walker playing Mike. So those guys were kind of, as working back from injuries, both of them, they found a way to help each other. But by the end of the year, and Kevin just confirmed this earlier, ironically, it was JOK was the guy in one linebacker set. So anything where they were pushing more DBs on the field, whether that was dime look or even like a quarter look at times, taking an additional D lineman out, whatever, he was out there. He was calling plays, and that role for him by the end of the year, being the head of the linebacker group, became obvious. So that is his. He's going to be out there all the time, which is a different part. And like JOK should want that because the linebackers who get paid are 3 down backers, and he's out there now and he's got that role. Hicks is there to supplement him, give him early down help, and be out there together. And it's just going to be Hicks. I think they like him. They still think he's, even at his age, as a veteran, which is going to, obviously he's got the long connection to Jim Schwartz, so that helps. But he's a veteran with JOK continuing to give him insight in the way that Walk did the past few years, but is a better overall athlete at his age than Anthony was. And I think he's a better athlete than Talk. And then, so for me, it's like they need to find a Sam. When teams want to play heavy sets, they have a third backer they can play 15 or so snaps a game. And that's where it's like Tony Fields and Bookie Watson, the rookie from Mississippi State, and Mahmoud Diabate are fighting for that role. Like, you gotta earn that role, because like there's 2 pathways to being a linebacker on this team. Obviously, being the second backer to Hicks or JOK, you're fighting for opportunities to get on the field in a limited role in Sam. And then obviously we know linebackers are wildly important to special teams. So you got to be able to handle all that. But I think that like the 2-for-1 happens with Hicks replacing the other 2. He won't have traditional 3-down responsibilities because JOK will just be the single back in those situations. And then, like I said, it's just finding the Sam and then figuring out like, oh, we can't let go of this guy, maybe Diabate, because he's on all core special teams units and we need him. Right. So that's the thing that they have to identify. They had the idea for that role kind of with Jordan Kanasic last year, but he got hurt early in the year and then was in and out. But like Tony Fields probably the leader in the clubhouse for that kind of like utility role, but there's going to be guys pushing for it. And I do think that there's a chance they like Bookie enough that he can play Sam for them, because like you watch his Mississippi tape, he could play some Mike too. And that odd front look they like to run there, he was able to handle all the responsibility. So he could be a nice little backup option for them. And he was highly, highly productive in the SEC last year. So I would imagine Watson has a chance to find the field a little bit this year.
Yeah, 10 sacks, I believe.
Yeah, he was
Mississippi
tough.
State. So be interested to see him during the preseason. Let's go and talk about, I think the one safety I think people have questions about is Juan Thornhill. I thought Juan was pretty fine in run defense last year. I think the coverage stuff, I don't know what to make of it, because he says it was injuries that like affected him last year in the interview that he did. I think it was with Cam Justice. But I mean, I look at his history and I'm like, he just might not be the greatest coverage free safety in the world. Like, it just is what it is with that, with him at that position. What's your read on Juan Thornhill? What do you think is kind of a realistic best case scenario for him? And what do you think we're looking at right now with him coming into 2024?
I want to give Juan the benefit of the doubt, because like at Kansas City, obviously he came into the league as one of the better testing athletes, period, out of Virginia.
Yeah.
Like, I was really in love with the idea of drafting him. And Kansas City got him, and obviously he had a great early start to his career. Then he tore that ACL. You talk to Kansas City people, they're like, he never quite was the same, but I also thought his tape was good enough to be a very adequate starter, and I thought the value was good when the Browns signed him. I don't think listen, calf strains suck. Like, they're awful, and if they linger, it's a really awful business to be in. So like, I do think the injury thing with him last year is real. Like, I don't think he was the explosive player in the back half that they were expecting him to be. And again, calves are hard, and especially you can kind of hide that with offensive linemen a little better than DBs who are cutting and constantly shifting, running, sprinting. But yeah, I do think that he was not the same level of athlete, and I think that plays a part in guys trying to cover a lot of ground. Like, he's trying to be rangy. I like him in a single high look. I think he's better there than split, but I am very much open. He's not nearly as bad as some people are trying to portray, because they take like he missed games and they try to spread it out. It was awful. Listen, it wasn't up to his standard. He's talked about this, like you mentioned, like he's been vocal about it. But I also think there's a really competent player, and he's not an all-pro guy, but like he could have a great year that turns into a Pro Bowl season. I like him, and I think there's something there. He's just got to stay healthy, and if he stays healthy,
when that calf strain happened, because
it was early. Like, he missed the season.
Yeah, because he had that one preseason game against Kansas City where he broke in, got that pick 6. And that was a level of burst from him that I don't think we ever saw during the season. And I'm wondering, because while I do this rewatch, even while I was watching, I'm like, I was wondering when that guy is going to come back. And it's also a thing with Juan where that's kind of who people thought he would be coming out of Virginia, right? This guy who could be an explosive playmaker, those things. And it just hasn't happened for him. And I'm wondering, like, how much of this is injury versus how much of this is somebody who is just kind of inconsistent when it comes to that element of their game. I think Juan's fine there at that safety position. Like sometimes people just shit on the safety because they're an easy person to blame whenever there's a big play because they're always in the frame. But
Yeah.
I'm I am kind of in this weird place with Juan where I don't know where to be at with him.
That's fair. That's fair.
And
Because he played hurt for like a large portion of the early season. He missed the opener. He tried to come back and work through it. It wasn't going well. Missed what, 4 or 5 games at the end of the year. Let's see him be healthy and see if there's something there. Do I think they signed Juan Thornhill and he's a Pro Bowl, consistent Pro Bowl, All Pro player? No. The contract tells you what they just need a competent player back there with some
yeah,
range to be able to impact things. And if he doesn't, if it's bad, you're hoping that Hickman can continue to get better, right? And that opportunity. So there's pressure from internally here for him to be good, or they're gonna alter the snaps and whatnot. But like I do think that if he's healthy and he has a good run up to the season and plays a majority of the year without I mean, there's a difference between an injury to your shoulder as a safety and an injury to your calf and your quad or your hammy.
true.
Like you got to run, you got to explode in those spots to cover the ground. So you're not wrong, and you're like, oh, you look different in that Kansas City game because he did. He felt
Yeah.
it was clear he felt good. So let's see what it looks like. I'm excited to watch him play because there is a better version of him in there, and I think that would be a really hugely beneficial situation for this defense to get that.
All right, and we're going to spend the least amount of time on the thing that's been like the biggest looming thing, the new offense, Deshaun Watson, because I feel like there's not much to really break down at this point. I feel like a lot of it's been broken down. Mm-hmm. It's just at this point with Deshaun Watson where we're like, hey man, we need him to play a viable set of games for us to get a sample that matters from him, because that sample from 2023, I think so many people are so much more down on it than what it actually was. But also it's a sample that's like in and out the lineup, in and out the lineup, in and out the lineup. And he's quite like the two best games he has. Questionably, you could say he was injured like definitively for like at least a quarter in both of those games. I think the whole second half in the case for Baltimore. So we're just at this weird limbo place with Deshaun Watson. My question to you is, since 2020, when Deshaun Watson was arguably a top 5 quarterback, the landscape of quarterbacks have changed. We talk about that 2020 draft having like 5 guys who got $200 million. All those guys have become names in this league since Deshaun Watson had that season. That's 5 guys have entered the conversation. Do you think the 2020 version of Deshaun Watson is still somebody who could be a top 5 quarterback if you just take that version of him, or what we have seen be his peak so far? Do you think that is a top 5 quarterback in today's NFL, comparing him to the guys who would be considered top 5 in the league right now?
I think so. I mean, like if you look at last few years, offensive play has gone down. Like the scoring has not been as high. I don't think quarterback play has been as good as it was. And again, it's going to be better in 2020 because there's no crowds, there's less chaos, right? Like that's an obvious thing. But defenses are getting better, and this is a very big talking point. Here's Sean McVay talking about it on his visit on The Athletic recently. Like defenses are just smarter than they've ever been about forcing teams to do things they're uncomfortable doing. So to me, if you got that 2020 version, that's real. Like that would be a huge difference in the Browns season, because the talking point that's been out there, and I've tried to push back on this, is that like, hey, if Deshaun's just average, they're going to be good. They're going to be great. Nah, I don't think that's the case, man. He needs to be good. He needs to be good to great. He needs to be in the top 10 of guys again, have that type of season, because the Browns I know they had a lot of injury issues on their own end, but they also caught a lot of teams and a lot of quarterbacks in the right time at the right moment and at home. And like some of those games were driven by some weird factors, those wins. So just leaning into things will get better because they're all healthy, that doesn't really work that way. So my theory here is I'm pretty entrenched in Deshaun has to be really good again. I don't know if he has to be that version 2020 great again for them to be great, but getting to those levels at times, he has to be really good. The first half of the schedule has some wins on there, but you're going to be clawing for wins in the back half of this schedule. And like the Browns' goal isn't to sneak into the playoffs anymore either, Quincy. Their goal is to win the damn thing.
Yeah.
And if that's your real goal, you're spending like it, you're signing players like it, you're extending players like it, then let's not tiptoe around about how the Browns are just okay, like they're good. No, they need to be great. And to be great, Deshaun Watson has to be in that tier of guys again. So
he has to be a factor. Like,
yes,
I think some people are like, oh, he can be a neutral and the Browns can get where they want to. But
right.
he does have to be a factor. And whether that be statistically or like in the fourth quarter of games, he has to be something where it's like you don't feel that bad about playing Pat Mahomes because you do have Deshaun Watson, right? Like that has to be the case. You can't go into it feeling like, oh my God, we can't measure up with that. If he has a good game, we're screwed.
People try to be like, I had this conversation with someone earlier about the Texans game, and they're like, well, it didn't really matter who was playing quarterback because the defense was that bad in that game. It didn't really. No, I'm like, hey, man, the score was 24-14, and the Browns were driving in the deep trenches of a drive in the second half, coming out mid-second quarter. It's a 10-point game. You go score. It's a 3-point game. It's real. And like he throws 2 straight awful throws decisions, and the game is over. My point is, like, you can't go into the playoffs thinking if we get this type of game where we have the defense playing this way really well and the offense is doing this, you have to be ready to win games in a variety of fashions in the playoffs. You have an identity in the regular season, but you have to be able to work, mend, and evolve that identity in the playoffs to win games in there. Because, like, in that game, CJ Stroud is clearly, he's dialed in and he's dealing. You need a guy that can in that game because it's like, hey man, first quarter, I'm seeing this defense is broke. We are gonna have to. These guys ain't getting stopped, so we got to level up. We got to be on that tier. So you need a quarterback who can do that. If he can't do that, and you have to follow some regimented formula to win playoff games, the secret here is that you're not going to win many playoff games because it's not that way anymore. So. One week you win because your defense is great. The next week you win because your quarterback is hot and he's dealing and we want a shootout. That's how it goes. So, like, you cannot live in a world where we think the Browns are going to be Super Bowl champions, have a chance to. They're acting like it. They're telling you they're chasing that. So that's where I'm at with it. Do I think he can do it? I 100% think he can do it. I've talked about it on my pod extensively about how his games were obviously driven by some people who want to talk about it a certain way, or like the idea that he couldn't do X, Y, and Z, when I have some tape evidence that he was doing all the Deshaun Watson things, but he's got to just protect himself. So if Deshaun just can look out for Deshaun, I think the player there getting more reps, getting more time in the game, getting into the fold again, like by the second half of the year can be that guy again. And that's what if you look at the Browns and they're mapping out on their whiteboard, like how do we get from training camp to Super Bowl, these 7 things have to happen. At the top of the list is by the second half of this year, Deshaun Watson has it rolling in a very serious way again that makes your offense really difficult to handle. So that's it, man.
Yeah, I agree. I think with Watson, I mean, I know people bring up his contract and it's usually like for like a cheap point here or there, but with him being the franchise quarterback, that's what they have said. That's what they have promoted him as. You need to be able to feel good about him. Like, you don't need to think he's better than Pat Mahomes. Nobody's going to do that. But the same way that Bengal fans or what's another team, Raven fans feel like they have a chance to beat Pat Mahomes because they do have somebody who can box in the same weight class. It's the same way you're going to need that. And it comes down to, like what you mentioned, you need a lot of ways to win when you want to win 4 games in a row against the best competition in the world to win a Super Bowl. You need to win a game with your defense. You need to win a game with your run game, probably. And you're probably going to have to win a game being able to shoot it out, right? And that's the one thing in Kevin Stefanski's run here in Cleveland that he has not done yet, right? Like, we have not been confident about a Browns team in a shootout, not because the offenses have been terrible, just because we have not felt like we've had the quarterback play there to be able to keep up when there is a shootout. So That's, I think, the one thing the Browns need to prove. Like, it'd be interesting what the reactions would be if they did win a shootout that first week versus the Dallas Cowboys, because there'd be somebody who'd be like, oh man, I'm glad we finally proved we could do that. But then
Yeah,
there might be
right.
some panic about, oh, is the defense regressing and all of this stuff. It's something that they need to definitely prove that they can do, because they're going to get in one, right? Like, Josh Allen going to get you, or Pat Mahomes, they're going to get you. Like, it is going to happen. Like, your defense can be great, but these guys are great too. So
The
can,
ultimate confidence piece comes from that, though. Like, your
yeah.
quarterback takes that aura, and you go into every Sunday thinking we have a chance because our quarterback is really good. And
Mm-hmm.
like, if Deshaun can go into those games and the Browns can win a 42-35, or can win some of those where he deals out 4 touchdowns and you win because of him, that's where the stuff grows. So, yeah, they need to. We'll worry about the defense when the time comes, but like, those shootouts in the playoffs are the perfect example of dealing with CJ, and like those games that matter where the team is hyper focused on how you play and they have a great game plan dialed up for you. Like, that's going to happen to defenses on occasion. It just is. So
Yep.
you need a guy who can step up to the plate and go toe to toe right there. And Deshaun probably needs to prove that to himself again. And I certainly know that the fans need to see it to start to really trust that every Sunday out there. Like, go ask a Chiefs fan every single Sunday, do you think you're going to win? Yeah, they're going to say yeah. Ask Bills fans, they're going to say yeah, we're going to win because we have this guy, right? Like, that's the thing. And Deshaun has been there. He gave the Texans that confidence at times, right? He's just got to.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he's just got to play. And I think when he plays and has those moments, that's where the whole thing starts to shift a little bit.
And the core of this misunderstanding is like when I hear people say this phrase, like, and it's kind of this like attack on Deshaun, where it's like, well, you guys said that everything needed to be perfect around Baker Mayfield for him to be successful, and now we're doing the same thing for Deshaun Watson. And I'm like, I that's a misunderstanding of what that phrase means, because when we're saying everything needed to be perfect for Baker Mayfield, we're not talking about like the players around him. We're talking about the play needed to unfold in a specific
Yes.
way for Baker to see it, right? And with Deshaun, that's not necessarily the case. Like, we've seen him play imperfect, good football where the play just kind of breaks down, he figures something out. He just needs to stay healthy, I think, is the biggest thing. And I think we all just need Deshaun Watson to stay healthy so we can just have a basis of fact about where he's at versus everybody going off vibes. Because when they go off vibes and nobody likes him, you're going to get what you get with it. So that is what it is. But Jake, thank you for coming on. For Browns fans, this is everything you need to know. This is a comprehensive guide going into the 2024 season. So if you had any questions or were, tapped out for a moment of time during the offseason, this video will get you all caught up in time for training camp. And speaking of being caught up, Jake, you alluded to it at the beginning. You've made some changes this offseason. Let them know where they can find you again, man.
Yeah, man, we launched a new endeavor on a different platform, so you can find us at brownsfilmbreakdown.com. So we're excited about it. It's a membership-driven, community-driven plan here where we, film, daily article, daily podcast will be there for you all the time. Community conversation. They have a really slick app built that will make it really kind of cohesively click together, and just excited about giving you guys, you go to Quincy on YouTube, you got another place you can find more Browns content on a different application on your phone. So brownsfilmbreakdown.com. We're really excited. A lot of positive numbers of people pulling into the network. So 24/7 here. Just would be lucky to have some of your people match into our orbit, man. So again, thanks for having me on. I always appreciate that, buddy.
No problem, Jake. Always appreciate having you on, man.